Alright, let me just make sure it worked. Looks like it worked. And yep, it's up. Alright, how should we start?
It's your show.
Okay. So, when exactly did you get into Linux?
Now, I couldn't tell you the exact day or time or year. I knew what Linux was back in the early days of Linux. I would say once the World Wide Web became a thing, which it really kind of started around 1996. And I was, in my late teenage years, early 20s, when the World Wide Web was becoming popular, and I wanted to build my own websites, and even then, web servers, a lot of them ran on Linux, even though Linux hadn't been around that long, but it being basically a free operating system, that's kind of where everything was gravitating toward. Nobody really used Windows. Well, I wouldn't say nobody used Windows servers back then, because it certainly was more popular then than it is now. But it quickly snowballed, and I would say certainly by the early 2000s, most web servers were running Linux.
Huh.
I started running Linux on the desktop primarily as my main operating system on the desktop around 2008. So it was quite a bit later that I got into running Linux on my desktop computers.
Alright, what was it like back then? That's actually when I was born.
Yeah. What was Linux like in 2008?
Yeah.
It wasn't, it was different. There was a lot more pain points, but it wasn't as different as most people imagine. Like there were some more hoops you had to jump through, some more configuration you had to do, but for the most part, Ubuntu had already been out since 2004. Ubuntu started, so you already had distributions like Ubuntu with the same installer that they have now. Essentially, it's a different installer, but it's the same process. You click OK 3 times and you're done. It's just, you didn't have as much software as we have now. Free and open source software wasn't as popular as it is now. People didn't talk about open source the way they talk about it now. Back then, you still had the proprietary software companies, the big ones like Microsoft and Apple and Google, things like that, that didn't really give much lip service to open source. Where now those companies are kind of all in on open source. Well, not Apple, but certainly Microsoft and Google.
Yeah,
that has changed a lot of things.
It's one of those things, I see it, and I'm seeing people go absolutely crazy, like, oh my gosh, this is game changing, it's innovation for humanity, Microsoft just embedded Linux into Windows.
Yep.
And I'm thinking to myself, hey, if you like Linux this much, why not just run it on the desktop? And I'm also just thinking to myself, this is just inner thoughts. It feels kind of weird that Microsoft is both trying to embrace Linux but also fight it at the same time.
Well, they kind of have to, because Microsoft is trying to encourage developers to use Microsoft Windows, because they know a lot of developers gravitate toward Linux these days.
Yeah.
There are surveys that have been done recently, like on Stack Overflow. You survey everybody as far as their primary operating system. Probably more than half of them actually use Linux on at least some of their personal machines. So that's kind of crazy when you think, Windows probably has an 85% desktop market share, but among developers, it doesn't have that kind of market share, right? Linux is very popular among developers, so it makes sense for Windows to have the Windows subsystem for Linux for people that want a proper Linux shell with the Linux utilities. That way, if you need to get into a Linux shell and use some of that stuff for whatever reason, you have that available already on Windows without needing to switch to a different operating system.
Yeah. Yeah, Linux is actually more popular among developers than Mac OS is.
Oh, of course.
Like it used to be.
Yeah.
It used to be that developers would use Mac OS because, like, yeah.
Well, I think part of the thing, yeah, Mac OS, like the Mac hardware, developers love the machines themselves, but as far as the operating system, a lot of the Mac desktop, the GUI experience and all of that, a lot of that is very locked down and inflexible, where
Yeah.
developers like being able to, they want flexibility, they want customization, they want to be able to do what they want, where in many ways Mac OS is probably the worst of the three if we're talking about Windows, Mac, and Linux.
Yeah.
Windows would be a better environment, I think, for development than really Mac OS.
Yeah. I think both of them are bad for two different reasons. So, like, Mac OS, yeah, because it's very locked down and you can only get it on Mac hardware.
Mm-hmm.
But it has the pro in that it's a Unix-like operating system. Well, actually, it's based on BSD, which is in turn based on Unix. Um,
Yeah, it was originally based on BSD, so I mean it is based on BSD, but it's based on so old a version of BSD. When Mac OS 10 started. I mean, what has it been? 20 years or so. I'm not familiar with the dates for for the modern Mac OS, but it's been a fork of FreeBSD for so long. It doesn't even resemble FreeBSD now. Like they're really not remotely the same operating systems.
yeah. Um, yeah, but like then you have Windows, and personally, I've experienced this. The whole like the way it does its file system is really painful to develop for. Like, in my program, one of them I called Clydo, which is my terminal to do application program. I had to write a function that detects whether you're on Windows or not. And if you're on Windows, it converts all the forward slashes in your path to backslashes.
Yeah.
And I had to use a custom crate because I program all my stuff in Rust. I had to use a custom crate that would fill in like the root directory, the home directory, stuff for me, and add compensations for Windows. And Windows just makes it really hard to develop applications that interact with the file system.
Yeah, that's one of the unfortunate things. Windows is an old operating system. Obviously, it predates um, Linux and doesn't really predate the BSDs, but or Unix in general, like the old Unix operating systems from like the 1970s. But the fact that for whatever reason Microsoft decided to go with those backslashes for directory names or directory paths is really unfortunate because it's the only operating system that uses those weird backslashes like that, and naming files in Windows is also a little weird as far as how they handle capitalization and things. In many cases, I think Linux handles naming files and directories in a much more sane way than Windows ever has.
Yeah, agreed. Like, I remember when I was using Windows, because I started using Linux around 2020, 2021, maybe earlier. I think back in 2019, I did spin up a virtual machine of Ubuntu and played around in that.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, my first Linux distribution that I actually installed on hardware was Linux Mint, and it was pretty cool at first. And
Well, you always have a soft spot for those first Linux distributions, the one that suckered you into
yeah,
making the switch. Um, because yeah, I remember the first distributions I used primarily on the desktop was Ubuntu. Again, it was around 2008. Probably was their LTS release back then, the 804 release, which was Hardy Heron, which had the really cool wallpaper with the heron, the bird. really fantastic default wallpaper. Probably the best wallpaper, actually, Ubuntu's ever had for their default wallpaper,
Yeah.
which is kind of weird because it's now so old. I mean, we're going back, like, 15, 16 years now.
Yeah, I've seen it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The only problem is that wallpaper with the brown and orange was all cool, but the GTK theme that they were using back then is GTK2 back then was also brown. And that was the one thing people hated, the color scheme and the branding of Ubuntu back then, because it was all these brown colors, these brown earthy tones.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I think really helped Ubuntu was, I want to say around 2011, or maybe it was all the way to 2012. Certainly by 2012, they were already on the purple. Like, they left the brown behind and switched to purple, and that was a lot easier on the eyes. People, I think, I know it's strange, people feel better about certain color schemes, because brown, people's like, well, that desktop looks poopy.
Yeah. Sounds like the same people who ended up hating Grovebox when it came out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Linux Mint has their shade of green, but not everybody likes the Linux Mint shade of green, right? OpenSUSE's shade of green to some is a lot more attractive, so they may go with that distribution just because, I guess there's a little more saturation. It just pops a little bit better, that SUSE green, than that Mint green.
Yeah.
It's just weird how certain people come to a distribution. Some people base their choice in distributions on the logo. That's how they discovered their first Linux distribution. They go to Distro Watch and they find a distribution that has a cool logo, and that's the one they pick.
Yeah. Which, I mean, if you're lost and you just started using Linux, I guess that's, you have no idea what to choose, so, you're sitting there and you're like, that one has a cool logo. Must have some talented people behind it. Yeah. One thing I don't understand, so, honestly, I'm willing to think that the person who invented the Windows file system was maybe drunk or something. Because, Unix was written in C, so C's been around before Windows was even a thing. And Windows is written in C, and we all know that in programming languages, the backslash is a special character in strings.
Right.
So for people developing for Windows, they're going to have to put 2 backslashes.
Yeah, for the escapes. Is that what you're
Yeah.
like escape sequences, and I had never considered that, but yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah. I started my journey in Linux actually kind of an interesting start. So I used to be a huge Minecraft player. I played a ton of Minecraft. And I would download data packs, resource packs, just to modify the game. And they were always zip files hosted on MediaFire. And MediaFire has this little section saying what operating systems support the file type. And I remember seeing Windows, okay, Mac OS, okay, Linux. What's Linux? And
I've never played Minecraft, but it's a Java application, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that would be why it runs on all of them.
Yeah. I think it's kind of hard to get Minecraft working on BSD some people said it's...
Yeah, BSD is a little different. Well, it's the same thing with Electron apps. We're using an Electron app right now, Jitsi. Electron is not good on the BSDs either for some reason. So things like Discord and Spotify and Jitsi and all those popular Electron apps, some of those are a little flaky on the BSDs.
Yeah. But yeah, so I saw Linux and I was wondering, what is Linux? So I looked it up. I just did a Google search what is Linux? And the first result I got was Ubuntu and Linux Mint. So I searched these up and I was looking at Ubuntu this looks very different. This doesn't look like Windows or Mac OS. And then I clicked on Linux Mint I was thinking to myself, because back then I was definitely very much a computer noob. Like I basically just got my computer, first laptop, and I was thinking to myself, is Linux Mint just a Windows is it based on Windows? Of course, I didn't know the term fork, but
it's a little different nowadays because when I started, we really didn't have Linux distributions that were trying to mimic Windows. If anything, they were as far away from looking like Windows as you could get in most cases. Where now you do have a certain group of distributions that are building their desktops in such a way to where it's almost like they want to trick people into thinking it's Windows when it's not. And I understand doing that for people that are used to using Windows. You want them to be comfortable in making that transition from Windows to Linux. But at the same time, you do need to make sure that users understand that it's not the same operating system at all.
Yeah. The distro Linux FX?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. That distro should not exist. But, it basically looks exactly like Windows. And I was looking for it.
A few months back where I showed the security vulnerability in it where you can actually just use the curl command and pull down their entire database of users. And it's not protected in any way, and it's a weird distro. It looks like it's a complete scam for the most part. It's something I would never recommend anybody run. If you need to run Windows, just run Windows, because some of these Linux distributions that are trying to actually copy Windows, like they're just straight rip-offs. They're using the Windows icons and wallpapers and things like that. One thing, a lot of those things, there's legal issues with using Microsoft's artwork and fonts and icons and so they're already, that's kind of shady doing that. But do you really want to sign up for like a product key for a distribution like that? Like if they're already shady enough to basically rip off somebody else's stuff, you probably don't want an account with them.
Yeah, and I got actually enraged when I saw that they charge you, and there's different tiers where you get different features. They charge you to use Linux FX, which
there's nothing wrong with charging people for your time as far as packaging binaries. It's work, but the problem is the way they were going about it is they were actually putting essentially closed source licenses on everything. All the custom programs that they ship with their distribution that Linux FX, that team created, because they've got a settings manager, their own custom suite of applications that they built. All of that stuff is actually licensed under proprietary licenses. That's a red flag.
Yeah.
You're using a free operating system, then you're going to basically try to close source it is what they're trying to do.
Yeah. They actually rebranded. So, I guess the guy behind the distro...
Yeah, when I did the video complaining about it, they were actually using the name Windows FX, and they had to rebrand, I'm sure for legal reasons, but they're really lucky Microsoft probably doesn't see them as anything other than a really minor annoyance. They don't really matter. Small little group of people. How many people probably have bought a license for Windows FX or Linux FX now?
Yeah, they rebranded to Ubuntu.
Yeah.
I need to look at the chat.
You also cannot brand a distribution with Ubuntu in the name because that is trademarked by Canonical.
Ubuntu's an African word.
Yeah, but you can't. But still, you can't have a Linux distribution that basically says, "Hey, I'm part of the Ubuntu family," because it's almost like it's part of, like, it's one of their official flavors, you can't do that.
Yeah.
Ubuntu has problems with people that label their distribution as Ubuntu or Ubuntu without the U at the front, because again, it's kind of deceptive.
Yeah.
Almost like this is an official canonical kind of product, when in a lot of cases it isn't.
Yeah. All right, I'm finally looking at the chat, and it, man. So, someone was asking, like, what is he talking about? I am late to the party. I'm sorry, I saw it too late.
I have no idea what we're talking about right now.
Hello, Darth Vader. I use Baco, who is someone from my Revolt server, which, hey, if you're in my Revolt server, I just want you to know I actually abandoned that because Revolt started doing some stuff I was not happy with. It says, hey, dude, there's this kid in Titanium Network's Discord right now who got sent an admin's virus that replaces the boot sector with the Debian installer maybe like 40 minutes ago. He hasn't spoke since. I don't know what Titanium Network's Discord is.
I don't hang out on Discord, so...
Yeah. I have a Discord server, but the only reason I use Discord is it hooked me back when I was still a Windows user.
And I don't know why you would ever click on a random link in online, period, especially in a chat room, even emails, never click on attachments, just ignore all that stuff. Even if it's legit, oh well, but chances are it's probably not.
Yeah, I'm not super paranoid. Like, I'll still click on it, but, like, that's because I know there's, especially because I'm a Linux user, there's really no way for it to infect me just by clicking a little link. The worst that can happen is it fingerprints me or something like that, or tries to automatically download a file, which Brave will automatically prompt me, hey, do you want to save this file?
Yeah.
And then the Linux tube is in the chat too.
What's up, Alex?
Yeah, hello all. Oglo, use you headphones to listen to DT. We've got a feedback echo. Oh, yeah, here, let me move my microphone. Yeah, I have some speakers hooked up to my desktop because I actually hate wearing headphones, but...
Well, if you've got a dynamic microphone, you might be able to get away with it if you keep the volume low enough. I'm on a condenser mic here at the house, so I have to use headphones because this thing will pick up the slightest noise, and we'd have an echo if I didn't.
Yeah, I can turn my speakers away slightly. I also don't have headphones with me, so... And then, are you still in mine? The file was named linuxinstaller.exe. What?
Wow, an executable file for Linux. Very cool.
.exe?
Yep.
Well, I guess on Linux files, that was one of those things. When I first switched to Linux, I was thinking to myself, when I change the file extension, why doesn't the file type change? So...
Yeah, because the extensions don't matter on Linux.
Yeah, which is actually kind of cool.
It doesn't even really need an extension. The files, basically, the operating system usually just figures out what type of file it is regardless. And of course, when you're obviously programming, whatever the shebang is at the top of the file, that's really what tells the operating system what kind of file it is. Just because you tacked on .sh at the end or .py at the end, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Wait, Alex, is the echo super bad or is it bearable? I could try some other things. I've got a plant right here.
Well, I could preview the stream.
Yeah.
If I can hear it.
Leo Messi asks, hello all, DT, what's your opinion on Hyperland?
I haven't used it. I have an NVIDIA card in this machine on my home computer, so I can't really use Wayland. Or I could probably get away with Wayland with GNOME, but I don't like GNOME, so I'm not.
Well, there's Hyperland-NVIDIA, right?
I'm aware. I'm aware.
Yeah.
But I know it's kind of flaky, and I don't like frustrations these days. I just like using things that work.
Yeah. I have a guy in my Discord server called Banana who he has NVIDIA and he also uses Hyperlink. He says it's actually been pretty smooth.
No.
Actually, there was one occasion where NVIDIA actually won over AMD, and that was, for whatever reason, it seems like Hyperlink NVIDIA actually lets you screen share in Discord, which is kind of cool. But actually, having the Linux tube in the chat actually reminds me, when we were talking about how like distros tried to stray away from the Windows interface, I was actually talking to the Linux tube some while ago, back when I still used NixOS, and we were talking about that, and I was saying to him, like, hey, I watched a Brody Robertson video, and I learned that apparently people hated KDE because it used Qt, and Qt's was a proprietary thing on Linux. I think on Windows it's still proprietary.
Many years ago it was proprietary. It's been a long time since it was proprietary software. It's been licensed as a free, under a free license for at least a couple of decades now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was talking to Alex, and he was saying that it's actually because KDE tried to look like Windows. And, like, since I guess the community back then was much more serious about Linux and the FSF and stuff, that they just... I don't know how to word it. Like, the community back then was...
well, I mean, it's still the same. There's just not much difference in this. Is most distributions do not want proprietary software as part of the operating system. Certainly not core components of the operating system. You just don't want to go down that road, right? Because everything's GPL'd as far as the Linux kernels, the GPL'd, all the GNU utils are GPL'd. And if you start adding weird proprietary components as core components of the operating system, that could be dangerous at some point. You just don't want to do that.
Yeah.
And that's why, I mean, distributions like Debian and Fedora for so long, Debian dating back 30 years now, they didn't want proprietary software in their repos, in their standard repos, and they never shipped proprietary software out of the box. It's one of the reasons Debian never was a new user-friendly, still I wouldn't consider it a new user-friendly distribution, is because people, just normal desktop computer users, are going to have to install some proprietary things. And Debian, you had to jump through some hoops to get some of that stuff installed. And really, it was Linux Mint, I would say, around whenever Linux Mint started. I forget. It started just a couple of years after Ubuntu. Linux Mint forked Ubuntu, essentially. And the reason for Linux Mint's existence, when they started in 2006, 2007, whatever it happened to be, is Ubuntu did not ship proprietary multimedia codecs out of the box. Things for like DVD playback, and MP3 was not under a free license back then as well. So you could play your MP3s or your DVDs out of the box on Ubuntu, because for legal reasons, Ubuntu being has a corporation behind it, they did not want to get sued, obviously. So they just didn't ship any of that stuff. So Linux Mint started essentially as a straight clone of Ubuntu with the proprietary codecs installed already.
Yeah.
And that was all Linux Mint was for a few years in the early days of existence. It was Ubuntu with multimedia codecs. Until around 2011, when GNOME 2 died and GNOME 3 became a thing, and then the creation of Unity and Cinnamon and Monte and Pudgy and all the various desktop environments we have now sprung up because of the mess that was getting
The
on the
Big
tree.
Bang.
And that's when these distributions, Ubuntu and Mint, they started doing their own thing. But for a long time, they were really kind of the same distribution.
Yeah. I actually have a question. So, I'm definitely very much a noob when it comes to setting up streams, but something like it was called Ferdy, or like the developer killed themselves apparently, but there it was how do you get the this Wayland window, how do you get, like, when you stream, how do you get a clean overlay over your desktop? Like, for me, I have to literally pop out the YouTube chat and just keep it as one of those mini Brave windows. And
I use there's a plugin for OBS called I think it's OBS Linux Browser. It's basically, it interfaces with a Chromium engine, essentially. If you have a Chromium-based browser installed on your system, you're probably good. But it basically allows you to give it the URL of the YouTube chat, and it will use that as a source in an OBS scene.
Okay. And how do you
place it in?
And like, how did you make it transparent and stuff?
With CSS.
Huh. Actually, yeah, V9, I know, DT's voice echoing a little. Here, I can turn down my speaker volume a little. Yeah, I should get headphones in case we do this again. Actually, my website is the first ever CSS I wrote, HTML and CSS. Let's see, can I share screen? Share screen. Oh, awesome. It works on Wayland. Then again, I'm not really surprised because it's an Electron thing. And it doesn't work. It just keeps asking me to select my screen.
Yeah.
And now it's broken.
Yeah, I was afraid that might happen. When you said you'd be surprised if it works, I was like, oh boy, here we go.
You
don't ever say something like that. That's, you jinxed yourself.
Yeah. Honestly, Wayland has been flawless for the most part, but then there's just these random little issues. Do I need to screen share though? You're previewing the stream, right?
I am, yeah.
How did YouTube... I never searched this. Oh, man. Okay. So, my website. This is the first ever HTML and CSS I wrote. And you can kind of see the resemblance, like my way bar. And... But yeah, I'm pretty proud of this one.
Yeah, it looks good.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, I like minimal sites. So.
Yeah, same. The whole thing with like transparent overlay that's blurred, and then like you scroll the website and all the little elements move individually. I don't know. It's a little too complicated. I like simple too.
Yeah, these days I don't do too much any kind of web dev stuff because really a lot of this has become overly complicated, and I don't enjoy it as much as I did in the early days of the web, where things were a little simpler. And the web just had a different kind of look and feel, a different kind of character in the early days. Now everything, like 99% of everything online it's just corporate BS.
Yeah.
That's all it is. Where in the early days of the web, it really was just everyday people like you and me putting up personal sites, and it was, it was just a nice kind of, had a little bit more charm. It was a community kind of feel to it, where now pretty much the entire web is owned by essentially Google, Microsoft, and Facebook.
Yeah.
So they own the web. So.
Yeah. Do you use Rofi?
Mm-hmm. I use dmenu mostly, but yeah, I have Rofi installed.
Yeah. I actually, oh dang,
One of the programs I maintain, the DM scripts, I actually have programmed it in such a way that you can use dmenu, Rofi, or Fuzzy Finder with those scripts. And because of that, I keep all three handy just to test things.
Yeah. People actually, like, people will see my Rofi theme and be like, how did you do that? But what's funny is Razzie, which is, I guess, the custom language Rofi uses for configuration, is actually very similar to CSS. Like, it's more powerful than people think.
Basically, CSS, yeah.
Yeah, and then I've also got these cool little buttons. But yeah, I've actually got my own Arch repository, which I saw your video for setting up.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I list everything inside of it, I've got this package called dmenu to Rofi, and it's just a simple little script thing I made. I can actually show you, like, if I cat user bin dmenu, it just runs Rofi-dmenu, and then I also added dmenu underscore run, and that just runs Rofi show run. It's perhaps my simplest package.
Yeah.
And then I sent you an email about it just to see what your thoughts are about it, but I also made an application called Distro. So I mentioned earlier that I was a NixOS user, and the reason that is I actually have 3 main machines. I have my desktop, I have a $200 HP Stream 11 laptop, Intel Celeron, Intel GPU.
The Celery processor, those are awesome.
Yeah, and then I have actually a System 76 Pangolin. And one of those things that I liked about NixOS is the reproducibility. That's why I used it. Mm-hmm. Not necessarily the other stuff like stability. As long as you know your way around Linux, I think any distro can be stable. And of course there's some exceptions to that, but so I had to move back to I basically had to move back to a distribution that complies with FHS, because immutable distributions are not able to comply with it, the file system hierarchy standard.
Right.
And
well, obviously, so they're not trying to adhere to that standard, which is fine. Because if you adhere to standards, then it does stifle innovation, like what Nix and Geeks and those kinds of distributions are trying to do. They're trying to obviously do something that, the standard file system hierarchy is just not built for.
Yeah, like I get...
But you have to break it sometimes. It's like the people that complain about POSIX standards. Well, if we're just going to stick with POSIX standards, then we're just going to keep doing the same thing we've been doing for decades and never innovate, never change, never grow.
Yeah, I don't really understand what POSIX
standards
is.
Are something that too many people in the free and open source community like to harp on, that we all have to standardize on things, but at the same time, we never standardize on anything. Because if we standardized on anything, we'd all be running one distribution.
Yeah.
We'd all be running, we'd all be packaging in one format, right? Like, these are things we obviously are never going to do.
Yeah, I think I saw it in a Brody Robertson video, but accent colors are now an XDG standard.
Okay.
Which is actually kind of cool.
Yep.
But yeah, I had to move back to an FHS compliant distro, and I keep telling people, like, because I still get comments from NixOS zealots being just saying, like, skill issue, you're just bad at it, or, like, stuff like that, or you're just not ready for it. And what I tell people is, yeah, I'm not ready for it because NixOS is ahead of its time. It's
I would just not worry about responding things
Yeah.
like that anyway. They don't deserve a response. Those people are just looking to poke at you.
Yeah, and whenever I get a comment saying like,
Just don't even give them the satisfaction.
yeah,
You're always going to get that. As far as any software choice you make, somebody is going to have a problem with it. And
Yeah.
if you actually take the time to respond, all you're doing is wasting your energy on that kind of garbage, where that energy could be directed toward more positive things.
yes, there's some comments though I do respond to sometimes. Like for example, when I get comments saying it's not the OS, it's the user, I just simply respond with it's both.
Yeah. Yeah, if I used to, and I would occasionally respond in the early days of the channel, especially when, because it's a smaller community, you don't have as many comments to go through. Now I get too many comments. I don't waste my time, especially with the trolls. I don't even read most of my comments. It takes too much time. But in the early days of the channel, sometimes I would respond to some of these people like, hey man, you did this the wrong way, or you should have done it this way, you could rewrite this in this fashion, and I was like, hey man, I'm just not as smart as you. And I know that'd probably get to somebody trying to basically act like they're a smart ass, and hey man, I'm just not as smart. I'm not as good as you. That would be my response. Like,
Yeah.
dude, you're just so awesome. Thanks for the comment.
Yeah. Leo Messi, I don't know, I wasn't really looking at chat, but I don't know if he's still watching the stream. Leo Messi asks, hey DT, I started to use Arch recently. How to improve my Linux skills? How to be a Linux professional? I know the answer to that.
No, a lot of trial and error, but a couple of things you can do. Obviously, you need to be familiar with the bash shell and the GNU core utils. Buy a book. One of the books I love is the Command Line Bible. Just Google it, look on Amazon for the Command Line Bible, and it will go through and teach you all the standard shell utilities. And it's great for reference. You'll come back to that book all the time. If you want basically the Command Line Bible in video form, I have a video called Learn the Linux Terminal. That's like a 35-minute video where I very quickly cover probably 80% of the GNU core utils in quick fashion and show you the common ways to use most of those things. So check out my video, Learn the Linux Terminal. I think that's what I titled it.
Yeah.
Again,
This is completely random, but it just popped in my head. I just all of a sudden remembered a video I saw where Richard Stallman ate a potato chip off his foot.
that wasn't a potato chip. It was an M&M. He put it between his big toe and the next toe because sometimes you want warm chocolate, so you put it. It heats it up a little bit so it melts in your mouth.
That video's funny.
Yeah, I've got a couple of videos of me and Richard. I've got one where me and Richard sing a duet together.
Yeah. I think I left a comment on that one saying like, I'm the first like on this video, but then I recently went back to that video and saw, oh wait, I'm not the first like. YouTube just kind of crapped out.
Yeah, that video is very old, several years old now.
Yeah,
Probably
I used
5 or 6 years old, nearly probably that video.
Yeah, so I think it's a new feature that YouTube added, but like if you go to the videos section of a channel, you have filter options, sorting options, newest, oldest, popular, and I just clicked on oldest on your channel and I was scrolling through.
Yeah, that would make sense because this had to be an old video.
Yeah. I'm recalling from memory. I'm not looking at your channel right now, but your first video, I think it's something to do with like open box on Manjaro or something like that.
My first video did have something to do with Manjaro, but it wasn't open box, but The very first video I did was looking at KDE Manjaro, which I installed on my main computer shortly after that video. And I ran Manjaro for probably a year at that point. But I didn't stick with KDE Plasma because I'm not a desktop environment user. So I did install OpenBox and do some OpenBox videos after that. I also did a pretty popular video at some point shortly after that on installing OpenBox on Debian, like doing just a net install of Debian using their mini ISO and then installing an OpenBox session, without having to go through the trouble of, installing GNOME, then removing GNOME.
Yeah.
That was probably what I spent most of my time on, actually, in the early days of the channel, like the first few months. Was OpenBox and Qtile were the two window managers that I focused on for the most part, because OpenBox was what I was using when I started the channel, and Qtile is one I had used before starting the channel, and then I went back to it and I wanted to do some videos about it because at the time nobody knew what Qtile was, so I was trying to get Qtile some attention.
Yeah.
At the time, like literally nobody had ever heard of it, and Qtile had been around for probably 6-7 years at that point, but for some reason it just, like, you'd go to like r/Unix porn and things like that, and people didn't even know. You never saw screenshots of it. Nobody had heard of it. I started making videos about it, and it's kind of helped its popularity. It's really caught on because I think it's deserving. I think a lot of that probably had to do with people misunderstanding as far as a window manager written in Python. It's like, well, it's going to be slow and clunky.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
No. For one thing, a lot of people don't understand what a window manager actually is, especially when we're talking about X11 window managers. All it is basically the frame around a window that determines the XY coordinates where that window sits on the screen. That is all a window manager is. It's a very, very simple program. You could write a window manager literally in any language and it will be fast because we're not crunching big numbers. We're not sending rockets out into space. Right? All we're doing is, can you figure out the XY coordinate for this window, for a tiling window manager when I open a window? Python's perfectly suited for that. Heck, Bash, you could probably use Bash to write a window manager in. I probably wouldn't do that, but a lot of people imagine window managers are like everything they see on the screen.
Wasn't there?
And it's not. No, it's really not.
But like, I remember you talked about briefly in one of your older videos. There was a window manager written in like Emacs or I don't know, but
well, there is a Emacs window manager for X11. It's called EXWM.
Yeah, but it's like one of these window managers. It's written in a language without multi-threading, so it's actually slow.
Well, any Emacs program has to run with Emacs. Emacs is the interpreter for the language, right?
Yeah.
Even if it doesn't run inside an Emacs frame. So you could write a command line application using Emacs Lisp, but in the background, Emacs is actually interpreting that for you. You still have to have Emacs installed on the system. So actually scripting in Emacs Lisp is kind of slow. I wouldn't write anything in Emacs Lisp unless you're actually running it as a Emacs plugin, essentially. But what EXWM, the problem why it's single-threaded is because Emacs itself is single-threaded.
Yeah. So it's
got to run. They're working on that. They're working on that. I think that's going to be the next big thing they'll eventually get around to fixing, because it's been something that people have been complaining about for several years now, is that we need multi-threading on Emacs.
Yeah. This is a bit of one of those questions where it's like, I'm a small channel, duh, I'm going to ask it. But like, when's your next YouTuber shout out?
I have no idea. I haven't
small
done
channels.
In the early days of the channel, I would do once a year. I'd find some smaller YouTubers that were doing good things, but people weren't watching their content like they probably deserve. They weren't getting the views and subscribers that I thought they would deserve. So I, highlight half a dozen small YouTubers on a video, and I did that 2 or 3 different times, like every year for the first 3 years or so of the channel. I haven't done it lately, and the reason I haven't done it lately is, to be honest, I don't watch much YouTube, and I don't go out and search for new Linux content creators like I did in the early days of the channel.
Yeah.
I just don't find it enjoyable watching Linux content, because I make so much of my own, and it's like, I've made nearly 1,500 videos at this point here.
Yeah, I've been slowly compiling a list, so when I become a very big channel like yours, I can make a shout out to smaller YouTube channels.
I should do that again. I should make an effort to go, and see, because a lot of the, I think I subscribe to about 150 or so Linux and tech-related YouTubers. Like if you go to my community tab on my YouTube page, you'll see everybody I'm subscribed to. But because I subscribe to most of those channels, in the first year or two of the channel, and my channel is 6 years old at this point, probably half those channels, those content creators are not putting out any content anymore. Most people don't hang around on YouTube that long.
Yeah, there was a guy at Micro Center, because that's where I got all my computer parts. I built my own desktop. That's also where I got like my microphone that I'm using now, and I have a webcam, but I can't show my face on YouTube because of the stupid COPPA laws, COPPA thing. Right. But there was a guy at Micro Center who has a channel called Open Source Slayer or something like that, and I checked it out, but his last upload was from 2 years ago.
Yeah, and you're gonna. That's most people on YouTube. Most people just put a couple of videos up, and making video content is not as easy as most people think. So most people are not going to make it a regular habit to upload.
Yeah.
And even the ones that do, like most of the people I subscribe to, were making regular content at one time. But again, most of them that I'm subscribed to are not making regular content now. Just a few years later, probably most of them have completely given up on making video content. So it's hard. Most people probably don't even last a year as far as making content on a regular basis on YouTube, because it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to be dedicated and to consistently make something on a regular schedule. That's a human thing. Most people just don't have that kind of dedication and drive. It's kind of like people that go to the gym on a regular basis. Most people probably know they probably should work out, stay in shape, do something physical, some kind of physical hobby. But most people don't do it because it's a lot of work. Right? It's the same thing.
Yeah, if I were to be perfectly honest, YouTube is not my main hobby. It's just kind of like a side thing. When I feel like it, I upload a video. So right. I do sort of consistently upload, but it's not like every day. Yeah. I get a video out every week, maybe every 2 weeks, which I've also noticed is actually a good practice because it lets the video marinate in the algorithm. Like, I actually get some pretty good views.
Yep.
Especially on my NixOS videos.
Well, you'll get, one of the things with Linux-related content, especially if you're covering Linux distributions, of any particular Linux distribution, people tend to watch that kind of stuff. Now, when you get into some of the more nerdier topics, then it's more niche. It'll be a much smaller audience that's interested in some topics.
Yeah, a guy in my chat called The Alternative is asking me to ask you, how long do you think you'll be doing the YouTube thing?
I could see myself doing YouTube forever. Not necessarily the channel I'm doing now, not the content I'm doing now, because that would be crazy. Like I said, I've already made 1,500 videos on the Distro Tube channel, right? For it's about Linux, free and open source software. Do you really want to, potentially make 1,500 more videos on that stuff? Probably not. But I've got plenty of interest out there. I could start other channels, but as far as making video content, yeah, I actually enjoy it. I enjoy turning on the camera, speaking.
Yeah.
And I'm good at it as far as a natural, as far as being able to turn on a camera and a mic and speak, even on like a live stream like we're on now. Got no problem with keeping things going. That was one of the things in the early days of my channel. I didn't know how this would go because I had never made videos on any platform before, but on YouTube. And then when I started making these videos, and especially when I did my very first live stream, which was just a solo live stream, I turned on the camera and the mic, hit the start streaming button in OBS, and away I went. And I talked pretty much nonstop for like an hour and a half, no problem. It was a pretty interesting stream. People seemed to like it. And it was one of those things, it's like, hey, I can do this. Because you don't know you can do it until you actually do it. In the back of your mind, you're thinking, well, this could be a train wreck. And luckily for me, it hasn't been a train wreck. I've had some live streams that were train wrecks, but they were usually because of technical difficulties, not my difficulties, but usually Linux difficulties.
Are we on the same time zone?
Yeah, I'm in the central time zone in the U.S.
Yeah, so America, Chicago.
Yeah, that's what I choose in the Calamaris installer, just to throw people off. But I'm not in Chicago. Nowhere near.
Well,
Chicago.
yeah, no, yeah. I'm in Austin, Texas.
Yeah, you're nowhere near Chicago either.
Yeah, but it is all the same time zone, right?
It is, yeah. But I'm about as far away from Austin as I am Chicago. Chicago's a little further. It'd probably take me 12 hours to drive to Chicago, where I could be in Austin. I don't know, maybe 8 hours. But it's still a long way away.
You're in Louisiana, correct?
Yeah.
Huh. I need to look at a U.S. map after this stream.
The problem is Texas is too damn big.
Yeah. I keep telling people, like, I've actually heard people say, hey, I want to move to Texas. Any recommendations? And I tell people, no, you do not want to move to Texas. And there are a few reasons for that. I think my biggest reason, the one that immediately comes to my head, is the weather here is horrendous.
Yeah, as far as the heat.
Yeah, we actually recently got a little bit of rain, and like in other places, a little bit of rain would be like, okay, cool, a little bit of rain. Mm-hmm. To us, it's something that, for me at least, having rain here in Texas, even if it's not that much, it's almost like a famous person just visited Texas and gave us all $10 straight from their purse or wallet or whatever. It's amazing when it rains here. And
yeah, that's what I get the same heat. It's a different heat because it's much more humid where I'm at.
Yeah, it's very humid here too. And that's one of those things I always
we
have a
had that
stuffy
stretch
nose.
here just a few weeks ago where it was like 105.
Yeah.
One day it got up to like 109, the actual temperature.
Okay, yeah.
Because of
actually,
the humidity, it's like it feels like it's 120 degrees outside.
Sounds like it actually got hotter there than here.
It's weird when you look at a weather map, like the heat zones. There is a little circle. You could draw it from Dallas through North Louisiana, southern Arkansas. It's weird for whatever reason. It's a little hotter in that little circle, which I can relate to Dallas because I actually lived in the Dallas area for a couple of years, many years ago. And it's the same heat. It's just a little drier. But it's not like West Texas where when you get out there, it's a real dry heat.
Yeah, I was in Marfa, Texas, for my dad and my stepmom's wedding, and it was not as humid, so it actually felt, I wouldn't say...
Yeah, it's different. Yeah, it doesn't feel as bad, because I've been in the deserts of, Southern California and Arizona, and it's the actual temperature, will be much hotter than it gets here, but it doesn't feel as bad because of the humidity.
Yeah.
Although there was one time I was driving through, what desert was I driving through? I was in Southern California. I was driving through some desert in August, and the actual temperature was like 119 degrees. And the car I was driving at the time did not have air conditioning. So all I could do was just roll down the windows of the car, and that did not help. It felt like an oven was blasting through the windows.
Yeah.
And I had a case of water that I had bought, and I just, every now and then I'd open a bottle of water and just pour it over my head in the car.
Yeah, that sounds rough.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was thinking when I become an adult and I'm ready to move out of my parents' house and, start a life, I might live here in the U.S. for a little bit, but I was actually thinking of moving out of the country. So, like, some of the places I was thinking of, I've got sort of a list. So, Japan, Switzerland, Singapore, some of these places, maybe even Ireland. They looked really cool, and yeah.
Yeah. So you're basically picking all the countries that have pretty girls. Is that what you're doing? You're making a list.
I did not think of it like that.
Judging by your list, I was wondering.
That's. The inner teenager has controlled my thoughts.
There you
go. But yeah, I have a couple reasons. Japan, I hear that the weather there is really beautiful, and that
Ireland is really cold compared to Texas.
Yeah, I honestly
actually pretty much everything in Europe is probably cold compared to Texas,
which sounds amazing to me.
Yeah.
Like I'm a bit weird. Like, I definitely should not be in Texas. I'm one of those people who will wear a short sleeve when it's like 50 degrees outside.
Yeah. Well, when it's crazy hot in the summer, where you get those 2 or 3 months where it's over 100 degrees every day for 2-3 months straight. You hate the heat, but at the same time, I've also lived in cold climates, and I hate bitter cold. I hate really deep snow. like it.
Yeah.
There's no. You're gonna be miserable no matter where you're at as far as the weather. You're always gonna find something that you don't like about it.
Yeah. I think personally though, I would prefer snow instead of extreme heat, because at least in the snow you can go sledding, stuff like that.
Yeah. Which
sounds really fun. But yeah, the reasons those countries are on my list is with Japan. Mm-hmm. I hear that the surveillance situation there, it's not the best. But the things I've heard do sound appealing. Like, for example, first of all, they block porn, which honestly sounds pretty cool. It is blocking freedom of going to certain websites, but at least is blocking something that would be tempting and would destroy my brain, basically.
Well, you're going to get censorship in many countries. Yeah, I mean, they're going to...
Yeah.
Heck, even the U.S. I mean, they want to get rid of TikTok now, right?
Yeah. Which I'm like half in support of, but also not in support of because it removes freedom of choice. But also in Japan, apparently Americans are very well loved there. That's one of the things I've heard.
Interesting.
And Switzerland, I chose Switzerland to also be on that list because apparently they have really good internet privacy laws.
Oh. I thought it was going to be for the chocolate. Sweden's going to be for the fish, the Swedish fish, the candy.
Oh, I love those. Yeah. One of my favorites. I think if I listed some of my favorite candies, it'd be Swedish Fish, Sour Patch Kids, and Mike and Ike's.
That's a solid trio there.
Yeah. Yeah, my dad is going through his midlife crisis. That's what I think it is. And for him, what it is he travels a lot.
Right. Well, there's nothing wrong with traveling.
Yeah. And then
I mean,
Singapore.
that's probably what most people dream of at some point, is to just travel. It's what most people want to do when they retire, it seems. Hey, I want to
Yeah,
make enough money so I can retire and travel the world, right? Or
for me,
get,
traveling is a bit of a, like, it gets really tiring because, like, I have to leave everything behind, just bring the necessities, maybe a laptop, stuff like that. And I just start to miss home and my cat and stuff like that.
yeah.
I don't remember exactly why Singapore's on that list. I just remember it was a good reason. But Singapore, they supposedly have really clean streets because you're not allowed to spit gum on them.
No,
and
you're
stuff.
not.
And I have someone in my Discord server who's actually in Singapore. Also, one thing I found kind of interesting is they speak Chinese, but they don't identify as Chinese at all. Which,
Well, I mean, Chinese, the language, is not Chinese, the race of people, right?
Yeah.
Right. They're two different things.
Like, what I mean is, Chinese is... So, the countries that speak Chinese, to my knowledge, it's just, like, Singapore, China, and then maybe some other countries around China, like Taiwan, maybe in some parts. But the thing is, those other countries, like Taiwan, actually identify as part of China, from what I've heard.
They're the same people. Yeah.
Yeah, so... Singapore identifies as a completely separate nation, but they still speak Chinese.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's like Mexicans speak Spanish, but they're not really from Spain.
Yeah.
And they're definitely, as far as their heritage, right? They're mostly Native American as far as, bloodlines, right?
Yeah.
It's a lot of it has to do with, the way countries were founded, exploration, colonialization.
Yeah. And then Ireland's on that list because I was watching a Ryan Trahan video. Like, I actually watch him because he does this 1 penny challenge thing where he tries to survive only off 1 penny. And it's actually pretty entertaining. Like, he buys a pen for a penny, and then sells that pen for, like, a nickel, and then just keeps doing that until he gets enough money to, go eat at McDonald's or something like that. And it's kind of entertaining. And he did one where he was in Paris, and he had to get home to the U.S. with only €1, and he stopped in Ireland. And I was looking at Ireland, and it just looked really beautiful. And so I immediately put it on my list.
Well, there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. One of the reasons I like places where it rains is the rain makes everything look it makes the sky less saturated. Kind of takes attention away from the sky and makes everything else look kind of saturated and vibrant. Mm-hmm. So I honestly wouldn't mind living somewhere where it rains a lot, because also when it rains, that's when I can actually focus.
Yeah, well, you could always just put on some video, some of the ASMR videos with rain in the background or whatever, if you need that kind of noise to I guess stimulate you in some way so you can get some work done.
Just doesn't feel the same though. I have Blanket installed on here, but I try not to use it because I will use it sometimes, but it just feels weird to play artificial rain noises.
Mm-hmm.
The real deal is the real deal. It feels amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, it is a little strange because you can tell it's coming through speakers and not through your actual house. Same thing with the cricket noises that people play, or whatever outdoor noises, the birds chirping, and it
Yeah.
never sounds quite right. And for one thing, obviously, there's different species of birds depending on where you live in the world. So you hear these bird calls, it's like, man, I've never heard a bird that sounded like that. So
Yeah.
unless you go outside and record your environment where you're at, it never sounds quite right.
Yeah, Anonymous, who is actually one of my Ukrainian viewers, shout out to Ukraine, says, I also love rain, but too much of it gets depressing. Yeah, I hear people say that a lot, but for me, honestly, rain just feels amazing. Anyway, anytime. Also, the SAST asks, can we suggest topics or questions? Yeah, go ahead. I might not do it if, like, I just don't feel like it, but yeah, suggestion's a suggestion. Go ahead, suggest it. Yeah. Oh,
Yeah,
man.
we might answer a question. We make no promises.
Yeah, I mean, a suggestion's a suggestion, so go ahead, suggest it. If my brain likes it, I will talk about it. One sec, someone's calling me.
Okay. Well, while he
Wait.
is, oh,
Testing the mute on my microphone.
that looks like he got it muted. While he's away, I'll answer the question here. What are your tastes in music? For me, um, I like a lot of different things. I like classical music. I like a lot of 70s and 80s rock. Uh, I like old country, like the oldies. I also like just oldies rock, going 60s rock, 50s and 60s rock, even. Uh, I like metal music. Um, I'll occasionally listen to some rap, especially, some of the old school rap that was popular when I was, younger. So anything from the 90s, early 2000s. I'd say mostly classical music is mostly what I'm into. A lot of that has to do with me being a classical musician by trade. I actually went to school to study music. I have a couple of degrees in music.
Yeah, I'm back. Yeah, classical music. I listen to it sometimes. I like classical music just because I don't know, something different about it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the term classical music is kind of a catch-all term for a whole bunch of music over several hundred years.
Yeah,
So
like
it's
Beethoven.
wildly different styles of music depending on the time period and the
Yeah.
country of origin, and so yeah, there's a lot of variations of it.
Yeah, like Beethoven, that kind of stuff. I like it.
Mhm.
Um, oh, Anonymous just corrected me. He's not Ukrainian, he's Slovenian. But you live in Ukraine, right? When I said Ukrainian, I meant you live in Ukraine. Sorry if that wasn't clear.
Hmm.
Yeah. I have in my Discord server. I actually had to. I don't think I marked it down as a rule yet. I probably should soon, but basically, so I have people from Ukraine. I have people from Ukraine and Russia in my Discord server. So I've basically had to say, hey, let's try and keep the war out of the chat, just because we have people from both sides in here.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
yeah.
thankfully, I don't have a Discord server, so I don't have to deal with. I don't have time to deal with drama like that as far as people arguing online. So
Yeah.
that's one thing I can't introduce any of that into my life. I have no interest in arguing with people or watching other people argue.
Yeah, I enjoy talking with people, but
I can't be on Twitter, that's why I can't have a Twitter account. There's no way.
yeah, that actually one thing I don't understand is um like you have these Linux YouTubers, and like I'm not throwing shade on any of them, uh but it's always so confusing that these people who are also preaching like free and open source, like they have a YouTube channel. I get that. That makes sense. But then like they advertise their Twitter slash X. I'm gonna keep calling it Twitter. X is a horrible name change.
Yeah.
And like they advertise Instagram and um, like
Well,
I know YouTube is owned by Google, but these other platforms are way worse. Way worse.
well, personally, yeah, I would say social media in general is not something that is healthy or that anybody should be on. But at the same time, I'm not going to judge these people for having those accounts because I can understand why a content creator, even somebody that is for free and open source software, why they would have a Twitter account or a Facebook account is they want to promote their content. And if they're promoting their content about free and open source software on a platform like Twitter or Facebook, that's probably a really good place to do that because those people are the ones that actually need to hear about free and open source software. So it's one of the reasons why I think Richard Stallman, who I love his zealotry as far as he sticks to his principles, but at the same time, I think if Richard Stallman had a Twitter account, had a Facebook account, had a YouTube account, and actually interacted with the billions of people that are on those platforms, his message would have been taken a lot more seriously by a lot more people. The fact that when you basically say I can't be on any proprietary platform at all, you're basically saying no one is ever going to hear my message except the people that already know about it anyway. So
Yeah. The SAST said, I'd use Revolt since it's FOSS over it if it were more popular. Yeah, Revolt honestly does have a pretty good user base.
mm-hmm.
Like,
I've never heard of Revolt, but
yeah, it's basically a free and open source Discord clone, but
yeah.
there are a few reasons why I don't use it. Before I get to the cons, the pros are that like I created a Revolt server for my YouTube channel, and I didn't advertise it at all, and I ended up getting like 85 people in there,
Yeah.
which is pretty good. And is the reasons I would not use it is their dev team, like they did a really good job actually making a good chat platform, but they seem to have a little bit of incompetence in there too. And I don't really want to use that word, but like they keep making goals that aren't realistic, and they also don't do the necessities. Like, for example, Revolt's not encrypted at all. It's got a bunch of problems with moderation. There really aren't any moderation tools on there. And honestly, they need to get their crap together before actually adding some of these
A lot of
fluff.
chat platforms, though, either aren't end-to-end encrypted, or a lot of the popular ones now weren't when they started. They eventually had to make that magic happen at some point.
Yeah, they
I don't think
also
Telegram was encrypted
yeah.
for many years. But I don't use Telegram because obviously it's not free and open source either. I don't hang out on any chat platform.
I actually learned
regardless.
that
So,
recently, that Telegram's not free and open source.
well, when I say Telegram's not free and open source software, the application itself is free and open source software. I think they license it, all the source code under the MIT license. The servers are not free and open source.
Yeah, it's kind of like
The back end is closed.
yeah.
Does that
is that as big a deal as the desktop client being closed source? I don't know. I probably what I hate about the back end of something being closed source is there's essentially one person in charge of the whole show. It's kind of like Twitter. There's only
Yeah.
one Twitter. Elon runs it. And if you get kicked off one day for whatever reason, you can't go to another Twitter. There's only one Twitter, right? Or with
Yeah.
free and open source software, like especially Fediverse things like Mastodon and things like that, Diaspora and Lemmy and all these other things. If you get kicked off of one instance you're on, well, go to another or start your own, or where you don't have those options if it's just the one server run by one person.
Yeah. One of the problems I have with Revolt is the whole LGBTQ thing, LGBTQ plus, it's kind of sensitive. So I'm sorry if I hurt anyone's feelings, but there are two. I like to categorize them in two different kinds of communities. There's the first community, which is like really nice, like very accepting. They're not self-conscious to the point where making an innocent joke will get you banned. But then there's the other community who I feel like permeates Revolt, where like there was a guy on Discord recently who got banned from a Discord server because he made a joke about binaries, like Linux binaries, and he got banned for like being offensive to people in the LGBTQ community. And that's the kind of community that permeates Revolt. So like I see people get banned left and right on Revolt because
this is unfortunately it's not necessarily any particular community like LGBT or whatever. It's there's a lot of people these days that fall into this weird political mindset trap where they're online looking to argue with people about anything.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, with one thing people haven't figured out, and I don't know why, because the internet has existed now for 30 years, is online communities. We knew this in the early days of the internet. When you joined, because it was much more community oriented, the internet was a smaller place. You would find this little group to hang out with in the early days of the internet, and every community was different. Every community had its own set of rules, had its own kind of flavor, right? It had its own, like its own kind of etiquette. And when you joined a community, you hung out for a while, you didn't say much, you tried to figure out what the general accepted behavior was in a community before you started just jumping in and taking part in it. And now too many people jump into these communities and they act crazy, or they act in such a way that community, that's not what that community is about, so they get banned. And then they complain about it. It's like, well, what did I get banned for? I don't know. Well, if you'd actually hung out and just paid attention for a little while, just for a couple of hours even in some cases, you probably would have realized how you acted wasn't going to fly.
Yeah, I think these people are just really bored. Like, they jump into community and they stir stuff up because
it's gotten, unfortunately, just the way the big social media platforms and the big chat platforms, places like Twitter, places like Discord, that kind of behavior where you just jump into something and you stir some crap up and just to get into an argument with somebody because arguing with other people is fun, that's promoted, unfortunately, with some of these products. And when you go to a place where that kind of behavior is not accepted, you're like, well, why did they ban me from this site? Twitter lets me act like this. Well,
yeah.
you're not on Twitter, and this is something different. Right?
Yeah, the reason I came to the conclusion thinking that they're probably just bored is because I'm guilty of this, but I'm guilty in a different way. It's more like when I'm bored, I might jump on a Discord server that's in one of my top rows, like often the Linux Cast Discord server, and I'll just post like a bunch of random memes. I try not to spam, but like I might post a bunch of random memes that I found funny. Yep. So, yeah. I try not to do it, but
somebody in the chat is asking, do you use Matrix? I don't. I've been on Matrix. Kind of like I say, I don't use Discord. I've been on Discord. I know what they are. No, I don't hang out on any chat platform. I'm just not interested in chatting with people online. Just sitting in a chat room, just waiting for somebody to say something so I can say something back. Yeah, unless I'm there for a real reason where I need to be there, that's a complete waste of my time, in my opinion. If you enjoy it, hey, great on you. For me, I feel bad sitting in a chat room because I know there could be other things I could be doing right now.
Yeah, for me, I'm kind of the opposite, and there's a few reasons why. Like, I do have a Matrix server. If you guys want to join it, dang, this thing. It's on my website. Just go to oglo.dev. I can send the URL in chat too. And you'll see my links, and I have Matrix server right here, and it will take you to the Matrix server link, and if you want to, you can join it. I'm not really active there. I'm more active on Discord since that's where all the people I usually contact are. But if you want to join my Matrix server, you can. And I'm actually sort of different in the regard of the reason I actually like sitting in chat rooms is I don't mind it is because I often, like, just the way I focus is I have to have something going on in the background. So it's actually very common for me to have, like, I might be programming, and then I switch back and forth between Discord and programming. That's actually very common for me. Yeah. Or I'm programming and I have a video playing in the background. Something like that. And so, yeah. And I actually encourage people to ping me. Like, even on my own Discord server, just go ahead and ping me. If you want to start a conversation, I encourage you to ping me. So, yeah.
Yeah, in the chat, the SAST, he's saying he uses it to keep up on false projects. Yeah, a lot of free and open source software projects, they have official Discord channels for support and things like that. And that's what I was saying, if I'm there for a reason. Like if I was looking for support on some particular piece of software and they have an official Discord channel, and that's what they promote as, hey, go here for support, then I'll go there for a reason. I get what I need and then get the heck out, right? But just sitting somewhere waiting for something to happen, that's maybe, again, that might have something to do with age, being the boomer that I am, right? Although we had chat rooms when I was young, in the early days of the internet, there was still chat, right? But it was different back then because we didn't have internet speeds that we have now. You couldn't be connected all the time. Like you had no choice. You got on to chat for a limited amount of time. You had to get back off because you were using dial-up, and if you were on the internet, you had no phone at your house. So you never got online except for maybe an hour or so at a time, because anytime you were online, nobody could call you.
Yeah.
So.
Yep.
But then, of course, now with mobile phones and cable internet, it's not an issue at all.
It's probably not obvious, but my Hyperland rice, I actually got inspiration from Windows XP.
Huh, okay.
Because I think you've said before that you don't like how Windows XP looks.
I don't know if I've ever really mentioned it as far as aesthetics. Actually, I don't think I've ever mentioned any of the versions of Windows over the years as far as did I like the way they looked or did I not like the way they looked. I have other issues with Windows other than look and feel. But was Windows XP like an attractive desktop environment? No. I mean, it really wasn't.
I yeah, I honestly liked how it looked. So, I think what I liked about it is the fact that it wasn't just flat.
I
Like it
liked
actually,
Windows 95 as far as the look and feel of Windows 95 more than I liked XP, which is kind of crazy because 95 was a much older version of Windows than XP.
Yeah, I think the thing that I liked about Windows XP is the interface actually looked like it had some personality. Um, like it didn't look super flat and corporate.
Yeah.
So
A lot of I have mentioned that XP was the last version of Windows that I ever ran on any of my equipment. And that the XP is the reason I use Linux now is because XP was a horribly insecure operating system that got hacked. It got hacked all the time.
Yeah.
You constantly had viruses. You were constantly getting malware, ransomware on XP. Really, some of the later versions of Windows now, actually Windows is a lot more secure now than those versions of Windows I used way back in the day.
yeah,
And a lot of it has to do with Windows kind of saw what other operating systems, mainly Mac and Linux even, hey, these guys don't get hacked all the time, constantly like we do. What are we doing wrong?
yeah.
And
This is yet another random thought, but I thought it was kind of interesting. So, the video game Lego Island, it turns out that Windows actually has code. There's Windows code, and I don't actually know how people found this out, but there's Windows code specifically for making sure Lego Island works. Which just, like...
there's probably a lot of stuff like that, not just in the like the NT kernel for Windows, but even in the Linux kernel. The Linux kernel dates back now, going back to 1991, I think was when Linus
Yeah.
Torvalds, he didn't license it under a free software license until late 92, but more than 30 years of code, right? And there are still some pieces of code in that kernel that are 30 years old that were written for purposes that are completely obsolete now, for pieces of hardware that nobody runs anymore. And that's just the nature of the thing. Who's going to go back and get rid of all this legacy stuff?
Yeah.
With Linux, it's a little different because the kernel team, and the Linux kernel being open source, anybody can look at it, anybody can potentially make a commit. But with like the Windows kernel, unless you work for Microsoft and you're part of the team at Microsoft working on the kernel, you can't even look at that code.
Yeah, there's a YouTube channel called Dave's Garage,
Mm-hmm.
and it's this guy who used to work at Microsoft and actually made some pretty, actually worked on some core components. Like, he worked on the NT shell, and he was explaining how, like, in Windows 95, 98, that, like, Windows 95 text on the side of the start menu was actually an image. So for every single language, they would have to make a separate image. And he was saying how it was really revolutionary when they were able to, in the NT shell, actually rotate the text. So they could just use text. And I thought that was pretty cool. He also worked on the original Task Manager.
Okay. Yeah. I remember the little sideways text in the little start menu. And, when you started telling that story, I actually wanted to say, I bet that was an image, because just knowing how computers were back then, yeah, that rotated text, you didn't see that. That wasn't a thing. And then because Microsoft being such a global company, yeah, you would have to have an image basically in every language for that one image in the start menu.
Yeah. saw a message in the chat that I wanted to address. Hold on, let me see if I can find it. Ah, yeah. The SAST says, I wish there was a movement to try and rewrite the kernel into a memory-safe language, e.g. Rust, and slim it down like they seem to be doing with Windows Mac ones. So there is I wouldn't call it like a full-blown movement to rewrite the kernel in Rust, but like the 6.0 release of the kernel did actually bring Rust into the kernel. And the reason I would not exactly do that quite yet is since Rust is kind of a new language, like it supports all of the platforms you could think of, like ARM, RISC, x86, all those platforms. It supports basically every operating system, even something like Haiku OS. But there are still some niche operating systems and CPU architectures that Linux needs to work on that Rust does not support yet. So,
well, the other thing is you're never rewriting the kernel, not the whole thing. So
yeah.
That's why you would want to do that. Maybe you have your reasons. You say you want it in a memory safe language for whatever reason. But here's the thing. The Linux kernel is tens of millions of lines of code. And most of those modules that have been written over the years, the people that originally wrote that code, they're not still working on the kernel. So who the hell's going to go and rewrite this code? Nobody, right? That's a pipe dream. That's never going to happen. The stuff that was written in C will always still be there, written in C. New stuff can be added if you want to write it in C or write it in Rust. That's fine, but
and it's kind of a useless thing to do anyways.
It's completely useless. And I hate when projects do this because I've seen pieces of software decide to do these big rewrites where we're gonna scrap it. We already wrote this thing in pick a language, C++, but now we're gonna totally scrap what we wrote and rewrite it, and we're gonna rewrite it in, I don't know, the flavor of the week, Go, or whatever. It's like, why? Why are you doing that?
For some of these projects, that I would say that makes sense, but for the Linux kernel, it doesn't. And the reason I'd say that is if you're writing a kernel in Rust, you're gonna have to add. I would have to refresh my memory on this, but you'd have to add the no STD flag, and you're gonna have to write your own standard library, and that is bound to have some non-memory safe code. Like, people say Rust is memory safe, and it is. It actually feels like magic to write in Rust. But the thing is, you have to have some non-memory safe code in there, in the STD library. Like, for example, everything in STD core, so standard library core in Rust, is actually not memory safe. Like, there's unsafe blocks in there. Because Rust allows you to write non-memory safe code, but you have to put it inside of an unsafe block.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's just, these big rewrites that some people want for various things, they really serve no purpose. You're just adding extra work for no real reason. If at the end of the day you rewrite a piece of software to do the exact same thing, but all you did was rewrite it in a different language, then what did you really waste? Potentially you wasted years basically getting back to the point that you were already at, rather than keep going forward with new stuff potentially.
Yeah, there are some things I'd like to see written in Rust. Hold on.
Well, some people will rewrite things in various programming languages just for the education of it. Like the GNU core utils. Okay, all that stuff is written in C. But many people, the first thing they do when they learn programming, they're studying various programming languages. They want some small project to do? Well, let me pick one of the GNU core utils like CD or LS or whatever it happens to be. I'm going to rewrite it in the language I'm studying in now. And that's a cool exercise. Now, are we going to take your version of this particular GNU core util and replace it with the one that's decades old and written in C? No, because it's not going to be optimized. It's not going to be nearly as fast or whatever. But just for the purposes of you learning something, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. I did, some of these rewrites actually do innovate. Like, for example, I'm using Eza, which is a fork of Exa, because if you didn't hear, Exa is currently a dead project, so there's a community fork called Eza. And that definitely innovates on top of LS. And there's also there's also New Shell, which basically tries to be a shell for the modern day. Like, everything is structured, everything has data types.
Yeah, it's PowerShell for Linux, essentially. It's
yeah.
Yeah.
And it also just has some killer features. Like, take a look at this ls command. It's awesome. And you can also, like, click on the things and...
Yeah, I mean, you can sort the columns and everything, yeah.
Yeah, and it's actually a writable shell. Like, this prompt that I have here in New Shell is actually written in the new configuration. So, if I go to my configuration, I actually wrote my prompt in here instead of using something like Starship. For Bash, though, I am using Starship.
Well, every shell you can basically specify a prompt in the config. It's just Starship just makes it easier if you don't want to take the time to write your own. So
yeah, I did write a grep clone in Rust called Grape. I should probably rewrite it because it has some bad practices in it. But
yeah, a matter of fact, when I was talking about for learning purposes, writing some of the GNU core utils, grep is probably one of the most common ones people do.
Yeah.
Pretty much everybody has written their own grep at some point or another.
Yeah, but I think I actually kind of innovated on top of grep as well. So if I don't know if Jitsi will freak out if I go full screen, so I won't.
Yeah.
But like, I've got some stuff, just the basic stuff. So if I pipe ls into grape and I say applications, because I have some app images, you can see, like, it acts just like grep if I just standard, but I also have the -p flag, and this actually tells me what line it's on. And to my knowledge, I don't think grep has that. So if I cat my .-rc, I can grape, and I can find everywhere where source is said. And, okay. But then I can add -p, and it says, oh, on line 88, you have this thing. And it also, so -p actually is -pretty, and I also add this underline because I think it makes it look a little nicer, which is something I like about making my programs in Rust. Is so I can just make a demo project real quick. So if I make a new project with cargo new demo, cd into demo, there's a crate called colored, and if I go into the main file, the thing I like about colored is it makes it super easy to color the output of the text. It's like I can add .red on the end, and it will actually color it, and then I also have to import colored here. And I'm using Helix, so I get these really nice code completions. Helix is a Vim-like text editor written in Rust. And I can cargo run. It will compile colored, and yeah. And I can actually go even further. So Rust has a really nice builder pattern. So like I can say dot red, then I can say dot bold, and then I could say on green. Just make something hideous. And then I could also say underline. And yeah, and I'll just keep it at that. And now, if I cargo run again, I get this really hideous thing. So yeah.
Right.
One thing I do is when I make programs in Rust, I always try and make the output look really nice. So like, for example, this is the program I use for my pseudo reproducibility on other distros. And like you can see, I've got all my commit messages, but I tried to make the output look kind of nice. So if I get the information about my config, like I've got these flat packs, crates, and then I've also got my native packages. I just try to make the output look nice because I have the ability to easily do that. I honestly...
There's a slight delay, obviously, between the Jitsi chat and the YouTube chat. So, like when you're typing and explaining, I've got to wait like 20 seconds to see it. But yeah, I got through the whole thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think there might be a way to remove that cooldown.
Yeah, there is, but honestly, it's not. It wasn't a big deal.
Yeah.
We've been dealing with it actually since the beginning of the stream. Every time you do something on the desktop, yeah, I'd have to wait a few seconds, but I doubt anybody noticed until I said something right then.
I see.
But I'm gonna have to jump off.
All right.
It's about time for my dinner. So it's getting...
Yeah, actually, that's just on time. My dad's coming, I think, to tell me to... Yeah, he's here. All right,
cool.
see ya.
All right, peace.
Peace.
Was that the dude?
Uh-huh.